high above the Atlantic Ocean, where the world below looked like nothing more than pale blue brushstrokes and drifting clouds. Flight 782 cruised at 37,000 feet. The first-class cabin, scented faintly with vanilla and leather, glowed with the soft amber of overhead lights. Most passengers had settled in, reading, sipping champagne, or drifting into mid-flight naps. Everything was calm, almost unnaturally so. No one knew that in less than an hour panic would crack that calm like glass and the most unexpected person on the plane would change everything. In seat 1 sat Eleanor Kingsley, wife of billionaire real estate magnate Charles Kingsley. She was known by passengers and headlines not for scandals or extravagance, but for her quiet grace, even dressed simply, cream cashmere sweater, elegant gold bracelet, hair pinned in a loose knot. Her presence carried the effortless dignity of someone the world had already bowed to. But beneath her composed exterior, a silent war was brewing. She'd been having dizzy spells for days, something she brushed off as fatigue from travel. She hadn't told Charles, she hadn't told anyone. Charles, seated beside her, was buried in emails on his tablet. The world expected him to be aloof, demanding, and sharp-edged, and they weren't wrong. He had built his empire on unflinching resolve and unbreakable decisions. The man didn't panic, the man didn't bend. But the world had never seen him confronted with a moment where power didn't matter, money couldn't fix anything, and control meant nothing. 3 cabins back, separated by a heavy curtain and 2 worlds of social class, a teenage airline janitor named Noah Alvarez sat quietly near the service galley. Most people didn't even know that janitors flew on certain long-haul routes to handle cleaning duties during stopovers. Noah was only 17, tall and wiry, with dark curls tied back and nervous hands that kept fidgeting with his lanyard. He wasn't supposed to speak to passengers unless addressed. He wasn't supposed to draw attention at all. And yet, fate had wedged him onto this flight for reasons neither he nor anyone else yet understood. Noah had taken the job because life had forced adulthood onto his shoulders too early. His mother, a nurse's aide, worked double shifts, and his little sister, Mariella, needed asthma medication they could barely afford. He was still finishing high school through night classes, sacrificing sleep and weekends just to help his family hold together. While other teens attended football games and parties, Noah was scrubbing airplane lavatories, folding blankets, and collecting empty glasses with tired eyes and a soft "excuse me." Tonight, exhaustion clung to him like weight. He had only slept 3 hours the night before, but he didn't complain. Not when every paycheck mattered. Not when Mariella's breathing had been getting worse and the next prescription refill was 2 weeks away. In first class, Eleanor placed a hand over her chest as another light wave of dizziness passed through her. For a moment the cabin seemed to tilt, lights smearing like wet paint. She closed her eyes and inhaled slowly, hoping the moment would pass. She smiled faintly at a flight attendant who came by to offer refreshments. "Just water," she whispered, voice softer than usual. The attendant, Maya, didn't know who Eleanor was at first. She only noticed the pale undertone in the woman's cheeks. "Are you feeling all right, ma'am?" Eleanor nodded. "Just tired." Tired. The word felt like a lie. Beneath her ribs, something fluttered strangely, an irregular rhythm she couldn't name. She told herself it was nothing. Jet lag, dehydration, stress. She didn't want Charles worrying. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to land in New York and sleep. But the body has a way of speaking when the mouth won't. A few rows behind, a businessman snored softly. A toddler in economy whimpered in their mother's arms. The soft drone of engines filled every quiet space in the cabin. Nothing hinted at danger. Nothing forewarned what was coming. Noah rose from his seat to help the cabin crew collect trays from the meal service. He moved quietly, almost invisibly. Passengers rarely looked at him. Some even mistook him for a junior flight attendant. He didn't correct them. He kept his head down and offered a polite nod whenever someone glanced his way. As he walked past the curtain into first class to drop off used glassware at the front galley, he caught sight of Eleanor as she shifted in her seat. Something about the way her hand trembled as she lifted her water glass caught his attention. He paused for half a second, eyes briefly meeting hers. She tried to smile, but her lips gave up halfway. Then it happened. A breath caught in her throat. Her fingers slipped. The glass slipped from her grip and landed silently on the carpet, water soaking into the floor. Charles turned in confusion just in time to see her eyes widen, not in fear, but in a sort of distant, stunned realization. Her body leaned sideways, knees buckling, face draining of what little color remained. "Eleanor?" Charles said, his voice sharp but low, as if refusing to allow panic to exist. Then she collapsed. Her head tilted back, and she slid sideways in her seat, unresponsive. Charles's breath froze before his voice did. "Eleanor!" The cabin reacted in fragments, gasps, rising voices, the clatter of glasses on trays. Every head in first class turned. Maya rushed forward, calling for assistance. Another attendant grabbed the emergency medical kit. A dozen passengers stood halfway, unsure whether to help or stay back. And standing at the edge of it all, forgotten by almost everyone, was Noah. The boy no one noticed, the boy no one thought mattered. His heart thudded sharply. Every instinct told him to move back, stay out of the way. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But something deep inside him, something that had nothing to do with rules or rank, stirred. Because 17 years of hardship had taught him something that money couldn't buy and status couldn't teach. When someone is in danger, you don't wait for permission to care. And before anyone on that plane could have predicted it, before even Charles could process his wife's collapse, Noah Alvarez would make a choice that would change everything, one that no one expected, and no one would ever forget. Long before Eleanor collapsed on that flight, the storm had already been gathering in the quiet corners of her life, unseen, unspoken, and steadily tightening its grip. Eleanor Kingsley had once been a woman of boundless light. In her youth, she taught music to children at a community center in Chicago long before she ever met Charles. She believed in the smallness of moments, warm tea on rainy days, helping elderly neighbors cross the street, planting wildflowers in forgotten lots. She had never asked for wealth or status. Those things came later, almost accidentally, when she met Charles at a charity auction. He was there because reporters expected him to be. She was there because she genuinely wanted to help. He remembered seeing her laugh at something an older woman said, not politely but freely, with head tilted back and eyes closed like she had nothing to hide. He didn't know then that her laughter came from pain she refused to carry in silence. Years before, Eleanor had watched her father die from a sudden heart complication at just 52. The memory haunted her, the pallor of his skin, the helplessness of that night, the terrible quiet afterward. For years, doctors advised her to monitor her heart closely, yearly scans, regular checkups. She followed through for a while until life got crowded with meetings, galas, and expectations she never asked for. Somewhere along the way, she convinced herself she was fine. She didn't want to be seen as fragile. She didn't want Charles to worry, or worse, hover. Lately, the dizziness had become harder to ignore. Charles noticed only glimpses, the way she sometimes braced herself on a doorframe, the way she gripped the edge of a table a little longer than necessary. Each time he asked, she brushed it off. And because he was a man used to solving problems only when directly confronted with them, he let it go. He didn't realize that silence could be as dangerous as illness. Charles Kingsley hadn't always been a titan of industry. He grew up the son of a mechanic and a homemaker, with 2 younger siblings and a father who believed tears were only shed in private. From the age of 12, he worked summers at his father's shop, learning not just how engines worked but how men hid their pain in the grease beneath their fingernails. His mother died when he was 19, a sudden aneurysm no one saw coming. He never cried at the funeral. Instead, he worked, he built, he achieved. He told himself that love meant protecting people from fear, not sharing it. But Eleanor cracked his armor in ways he never expected. She didn't try to change him, she simply existed with kindness so disarming it made his silence louder. Over the years, she became the only person he allowed to see past the steel exterior. And yet, even with her, he often mistook control for care. They argued less than most couples, but they spoke less too. Words they should have said were often swallowed in the rush of planes, meetings, and headlines. And now, somewhere between continents, guilt churned in his chest like a second heartbeat. Far from the polished world of billionaires and boardrooms, Noah Alvarez carried his own quiet battles. His father had left when he was 8, disappearing with promises he never meant to keep. Since then, Noah's mother worked herself sick just to pay rent and keep the lights on. Noah became the silent anchor of the family, cooking meals, checking Mariella's breathing at night, and pretending not to notice when their mother cried in the bathroom with the faucet running to hide the sound. Money was always short. When Mariella had her first major asthma attack at 9, Noah sat in the back of an ambulance holding her hand while his mother filled out paperwork through tears. They almost lost her that night. Since then, every wheeze, every cough carried the weight of that memory. At 15, Noah started cleaning jobs in office buildings after school. At 16, he applied for overnight cleaning shifts at the airport. When the airline offered a travel janitorial rotation with decent pay and benefits, he accepted without hesitation, even if it meant sleeping in storage rooms and doing homework in supply closets. But exhaustion wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was invisibility. Passengers rarely looked at him with kindness. Some ignored him. Others spoke to him like he was a background fixture. He learned to be quiet, to blend into corners, to move only when needed. Yet beneath that silence, there lived a boy with a heart too big for the world's neglect. On the flight, moments before Eleanor collapsed, Noah had been replaying a memory in his mind, Mariella laughing between coughs as he braided her hair before school. She told him once, "When I grow up, I want to be a doctor and fix people for free." He laughed at the time, but the thought stayed with him. What if the world only noticed kindness when disaster forced it to? Back up in first class, Charles's bark of panic sliced the air, sharp enough to startle even those wearing noise-canceling headphones. Eleanor's body slumped unnaturally against the armrest, her head tilted, eyes closed. The attendants rushed in a flurry of protocol, paging the intercom for any medical professional on board. Someone shouted they were a dentist. Another said they had CPR certification from years ago. Everyone wanted to help, but no one knew how. As the chaos gathered around her, Charles froze, not from indifference, but from a terror he had never learned to manage. His hands hovered uselessly in the air, trembling with the weight of every failure he had never allowed himself to feel. The sound of Eleanor's shallow breath, if it even was that, echoed louder in his head than the roar of the engines. And in that moment, while attendants scrambled and first-class passengers half rose from their seats, Noah stood at the edge of the scene with a single thought he could not shake. She doesn't look scared. She looks gone. But what could he do? He was just the janitor, just the boy in the wrong cabin. He had no authority, no medical training beyond high school first aid, and the memory of an EMT showing him how to monitor breathing during his sister's worst attack. He didn't even have permission to stand this close. Yet something deeper than permission, something closer to instinct, closer to love, was beginning to push at his feet, and the sky outside the windows remained vast and mercilessly silent, a reminder that the world offered no easy landing when life suddenly unraveled miles above the earth. Chaos in the air doesn't sound like screaming, it sounds like silence breaking in every direction. The moment Eleanor's body slumped fully out of her seat, everything inside first class lost its rhythm. A woman gasped into her hands. A man dropped his glass, champagne spilling like a golden thread across the carpet. A flight attendant fumbled with the intercom, her voice trembling as she announced, "Medical emergency in first class. If there is a doctor on board, please come forward immediately." But the world doesn't always put doctors in the right seats. A retired podiatrist hurried forward, breathless and unsure. He kneeled awkwardly beside Eleanor, feeling for a pulse with fingers that shook more with fear than age. I'm not sure," he muttered. Her heartbeat is faint, very faint. Charles's face, usually unreadable even under cameras and investor glare, cracked in a way no one had ever seen. His voice came out low, tight, breaking at the edges. "She's going to be fine. Do something. Do something now." Maya, the lead attendant, knelt on the opposite side, medical kit open but hands paralyzed by hesitation. The automated external defibrillator sat in its case, unopened. Oxygen mask ready, but no one acted with certainty. Procedures blurred under pressure. Every second felt like the edge of a cliff. Eleanor's breathing, if it could still be called that, had thinned into near nothing. It was then that Noah stepped closer. He didn't fully understand why, only that his feet moved as though pulled by an invisible thread. He wasn't within arm's reach yet, just near enough to see the stillness in her chest, near enough to hear the tremor in Charles's breath, near enough to feel guilt claw at him for even thinking he could matter here. "I'm not supposed to be here," he thought. "I'm not supposed to speak." Memories from his past flickered in, sharp and uninvited. Mariella's limp body in his arms during her worst asthma attack, her lips turning pale. The moment he thought she wouldn't wake up, his own hands shaking as he tried to remember where to press, how to tilt her head, how to wait for help while doing something. Anything. Back in the cabin, one passenger urged, "Lower her to the floor. Lay her flat." Another shook his head. "No, don't move her. She could have a spinal issue." Arguments piled up faster than decisions. Charles stood frozen, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on Eleanor's face like he could pull her back by will alone. For the first time in years, power meant nothing. Status meant nothing. He would have traded everything he owned just to hear her breathe with certainty again. And then Eleanor's lips parted, once, shallowly, and then didn't move again. Maya sucked in a breath. I think she stopped breathing. The retired podiatrist pressed 2 fingers to her neck, then looked up, pale. I don't feel a pulse. Shock didn't explode. It sank, slow, drowning, suffocating. It pulled the air out of the room. Noah's heart slammed against his ribs. His breath started to race, not from panic, but from something else. Memory, instinct, love disguised as urgency. I know CPR, he heard himself whisper before his brain caught up. No one turned. No one heard him. He swallowed louder this time. I know CPR. Heads snapped toward him like rubber bands. Some with disbelief, some with annoyance, some with surprise that the boy holding an empty glass tray had spoken at all. Charles stared at him but didn't seem to see him. His voice came out like groundstone. Who are you? Noah's pulse thundered in his ears. I'm with maintenance crew. I'm flight janitorial staff, sir, but I know CPR. A businessman in the second row scoffed under his breath. Get a real medic. The retired podiatrist wiped sweat from his brow. Even if he knows it, I'm not sure. Noah knelt down before anyone gave permission. I've done this before. His voice was soft, not defiant but steady. I helped save my sister's life. I've trained. Please. Maya hesitated, torn between protocol and desperation. She looked at the podiatrist first. He nodded reluctantly, stepping back. Then she looked at Charles. Charles didn't blink. He didn't move. But his eyes, bloodshot, terrified, shifted in a way that wasn't yes or no but surrender. And sometimes surrender is permission. Noah lowered Eleanor gently to the aisle floor with Maya's help. The chatter behind him faded into static. His hands trembled, once, then, steadied as memory took over. He tilted her head back slightly, checking her airway, listening near her lips for breath. Nothing. He interlaced his fingers, placing the heel of his hand on the center of her chest. The same way he did for Mariella. The same way he practiced with the CPR instructor who told him he had the hands of someone who doesn't panic. 1 compression, 2, 3, 30. He counted in his head. The rhythm wasn't perfect, but it was real. Maya handed him the airway barrier mask. He gave 2 breaths, watching her chest rise faintly, almost imperceptibly. Behind him, a woman whispered, "That kid. He's just a janitor." Another muttered, "This is insane." But between the doubt and the whispers, something else began to fill the space, hope creeping in like light through a broken door. Charles knelt beside Eleanor, hands shaking, eyes glassy. Each compression seemed to echo inside him. Regret stacked itself in brutal clarity, the signs he ignored, the questions he didn't ask, the times he assumed tomorrow would always be there. Noah kept going. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, again. Maya monitored the AED, waiting for it to charge. The podiatrist hovered nearby, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. A attendant whispered into a headset, coordinating with ground emergency support, her voice cracking. Minutes in the air felt like hours on the ground. Noah's arms began to ache, but he didn't stop. His breath came heavy, but his focus didn't waver. He remembered the way Mariella gasped back to life that night in their living room, the way his mother sobbed when the paramedics arrived. He remembered telling himself afterward, if I can do it once, I can do it again. He didn't consider that this woman was someone whose face was in magazines, whose last name carried billion-dollar weight. To him, she was simply a life in front of him, a life trying to slip away. Suddenly, faint but undeniable, a shallow flutter under his fingers. Maya pressed her ear near Eleanor's mouth. Her eyes widened. She's got a pulse. It's weak, but it's there. The cabin seemed to exhale at once. Someone cried. Someone clasped their hands over their mouth. The businessman who scoffed fell silent and sat down heavily, as if the floor pulled him. Charles's head dropped, a ragged breath tearing free from his chest, one that sounded too much like a sob. But Noah didn't stop listening. He checked again. Her breathing was fragile, inconsistent. She still needs oxygen, he said quietly, and she might crash again. And now the eyes that once looked past him turned fully to him, not as a janitor, but as the only person who had truly acted before it was too late. In the air, miles from land and higher than reason, the most unlikely hands had defied the unthinkable, and the fight was only beginning. The pulse that returned to Eleanor was like the flicker of a match in a storm, there but desperately fragile. Noah stayed crouched beside her, sweat gathering at his temples, breath still uneven from the intensity of the compressions. Every instinct in him screamed, "Don't stop watching her." His hands hovered, ready to act again if the faint rhythm under her skin faded. Maya quickly fitted the oxygen mask over Eleanor's nose and mouth, her hands trembling despite her flight training. The cabin lights above flickered as the pilot's voice came over the PA, calm but urgent. "This is Captain Lawrence. We have a medical emergency on board. We are coordinating with air traffic control for an emergency landing. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions." Passengers remained hushed, the kind of silence that didn't feel calm. It felt reverent, tense, and terrified. The villagers of first class who once held designer bags and quiet superiority now sat stiffly, eyes darting between the unconscious woman and the teenage boy kneeling beside her. Charles still hadn't fully spoken. The shock had carved deep lines into his expression, making him look decades older. He searched Eleanor's face for any sign of awareness, an eyelid twitch, a breath drawn more fully, a flutter of fingers. Nothing yet. Noah gently tilted her head to maintain airflow. He looked up at Maya. Her breathing still isn't steady. If it slows again, I need to start compressions before her heart stops. The retired podiatrist, humbled and quiet, nodded. He's right. Keep monitoring. Someone in row 2 whispered, "That kid. How does he even know what he's doing?" Another answered under their breath, "Better than any of us, apparently." For several minutes time didn't move normally. Every second felt soaked in fear. Eleanor's chest rose lightly under the oxygen mask, the breath shallow but present. Charles finally found his voice, barely more than a whisper. Is she going to make it?" Noah didn't look up when he answered. "She has a chance. That's what matters right now." It wasn't the answer Charles was used to. He was accustomed to certainty, contracts, guarantees, numbers he could read and control. But everything about this moment reminded him that some things defy power. The aircraft began its descent. The change in cabin pressure made several passengers hold their seats. Flight attendants secured loose trays and guided passengers back into position. But no one looked away from the aisle. Then, without warning, Eleanor's chest stilled again. Maya's gasp was sharp. "She's not—" Noah was already moving, gently removing the oxygen mask and positioning his hands again. "I've got it." He began compressions immediately. 30 presses, firm and rhythmic, his arms straight, his breathing quick but steady. 2 breaths through the mask. Again. Again. Charles knelt opposite him, watching in anguish, his hands braced against the floor. Something inside him broke with each compression. Memories flooded him. The first time Eleanor took his hand at a charity gala, the morning they married in a quiet ceremony, the way she'd laugh when he burned toast and tried to hide it. "Don't take her, please don't take her." Noah's arms started to ache, sharp pain shooting through his shoulders. But he didn't stop. Pain meant nothing next to the thought of losing someone when he could fight for them. Maya counted compressions aloud so he wouldn't lose rhythm. 21, 22. By the time she reached 30, Noah paused for breath and listened. Nothing. He pressed again. Another cycle. Someone in the second row quietly sobbed. Then, like embers catching wind, a faint cough escaped Eleanor's lips. Barely audible, but unmistakably real. Maya clamped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. "She's back again. Oh my God, she's breathing." Noah leaned in, checking her pulse, monitoring the rise and fall of her chest. It was weak, but stronger than before. Charles let out a ragged, half-choked sound, relief tangled with disbelief and sorrow. It wasn't a cry, but something older and deeper than one. He reached out with shaking hands and grazed Eleanor's fingers, careful not to disturb the mask as it was replaced. "Eleanor, I'm here. I'm right here," he said, voice cracking down the middle. The retired podiatrist finally found purpose again, checking vitals carefully now that a rhythm had returned. "Her pulse is stronger this time. We just need to keep her stable until we land." Someone behind them whispered, "That boy just saved her life twice." The boy didn't look like a hero. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, his knees pressed into the carpet, and his face flushed with effort. But in that moment, no title, income, or pedigree could overshadow the truth. He was the reason the woman was still alive. "ETA to emergency landing is 9 minutes, the intercom announced. 9 minutes, an eternity, and an instant. Noah sat back on his heels, keeping his eyes locked on Eleanor's chest. "She needs to stay on oxygen, and someone has to keep monitoring her pulse. If she dips again, I'll start compressions right away." The podiatrist hesitated, then placed his fingers on Eleanor's wrist. "I'll take it. Just tell me what to watch for." Noah nodded, guiding him through the rhythm with gentle instruction. If it slows or drops out, we start again. Don't wait. Charles looked at the boy fully now, really looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. He swallowed hard. What's your name? Noah, he said softly, still watching Eleanor. Noah Alvarez. Charles nodded like he needed to memorize it. Thank you isn't enough, but I'll never forget it. Those words would have made most people emotional, but Noah couldn't allow himself to feel anything yet. Not until she was safely on the ground, in trained hands, with machines and monitors and medicine that could take over the fight he had been holding alone. The descent was fast and rough. The landing gear extended with a heavy groan that rattled the entire cabin. The nose began to dip. Lights flickered. Someone nearby clutched their armrest like it might disappear from under them. Maya and another attendant held Eleanor steady as the plane angled down. Charles braced himself with one hand on the armrest, the other still lightly touching Eleanor's fingers like an anchor. The oxygen mask fogged slightly with each breath she managed. Noah sat on the floor, back against a seat, ready to leap forward if needed. When the wheels struck the runway, the impact jolted passengers upright. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The engines reversed with a mighty roar. Within seconds, emergency medical personnel boarded through the front door. They rushed toward Eleanor with a stretcher, oxygen tanks, and monitors. One paramedic asked quickly, "Who performed CPR?" Before Maya or the podiatrist could answer, Charles spoke hoarsely, turning toward Noah with something close to awe he did. Every medic's eyes landed on the teenage janitor in disbelief, but also respect. And though Eleanor remained unconscious, alive remained enough. The world would learn what happened on that flight. But not yet. First, there was one more moment fate had reserved for the sky. The moment the plane came to a full stop on the emergency runway, it felt as though every breath on board had been borrowed from hope itself. The cabin lights stabilized, and the doors opened to the blinding glare of floodlights and the swift movements of emergency medics. For many it felt like waking from a nightmare. For Noah, it felt like waking into another world. Two paramedics knelt immediately beside Eleanor and began attaching monitors to her chest and oxygen tubing to her mask. Her shallow breaths registered on their portable equipment, and though her heartbeat was weak, it was steady enough to transport. One medic checked her pupils with a penlight, while the other administered IV fluids with quick, practiced movements. Pulses thready but stable enough to move. "Let's get her to the ambulance. I see you en route," one of them said. Charles hovered close, his normally unshaken composure in ruins. His hands were still trembling, but now they trembled with relief. "Please, just take care of her. I'll follow the ambulance." As the medics lifted Eleanor onto the stretcher, the sound of Velcro straps tightening echoed through the aisle like the last click of a closing door. Charles stepped back with visible reluctance, his eyes never leaving her face. His world, built on deals, headlines, and stone-cold decisions, had been reduced to the rise and fall of one woman's breath. The paramedics wheeled her toward the exit, moving carefully down the narrow aisle. The passengers in first class, usually so insulated from inconvenience, instinctively pulled their knees in and bowed their heads as she passed, reverence softening their posture. But every so often, their eyes drifted to Noah. He sat back on his heels, exhausted beyond measure, his hands still slightly shaking from the strain of compressions. His face bore the pale sweat of adrenaline and effort. His uniform, once clean and crisp, was now wrinkled, with the imprint of carpet fibers on his knees. A paramedic paused by him briefly, glancing at the monitors hooked up to Eleanor. "You did compressions?" he asked, voice level but impressed. Noah nodded quietly. The medic held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "You saved her life. Twice." Then he followed the stretcher out, leaving silence in his wake. It was only then that the crew guided the remaining passengers to disembark. Some still whispered among themselves, their eyes lingering on the teenage janitor like he was someone they couldn't quite categorize. A few nodded at him in silent gratitude. Others looked guilty for the assumptions they'd made. The businessman who had scoffed earlier paused as he passed Noah. He seemed to wrestle with something before saying, voice low, "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry." Then he moved on, eyes fixed on the floor. Noah didn't respond. He wasn't angry, just tired. Maya approached him slowly, unsure if words were enough. "You stayed calm through everything," she said softly. "I've seen fully trained staff fall apart in emergencies like this. But you," he stood, rubbing his aching arms. "I just did what I could. You did what most people wouldn't dare. Outside the aircraft, the cold night air hit sharp and clear, flooding Noah's lungs with something close to relief. The tarmac buzzed with emergency lights, flashing red and white across the expanse of asphalt. The ambulance doors closed around Eleanor, and the sirens rose moments later, carrying her into the night. Charles remained near the bottom of the stair car, phone in hand but unused. His private car and security detail had already been notified, but none of that seemed to matter. When Noah stepped onto the tarmac, their eyes met for the first time, human to human, not billionaire to employee. Charles approached him. For a moment he didn't speak. He looked at the boy like he was trying to reconcile two conflicting truths: one, the world he knew; two, the one that had just shattered and reformed around him. Finally his voice emerged, rough and quiet. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Noah said gently. Charles shook his head. "I do. You didn't just help my wife. You gave me a chance to tell her everything I never said enough." Noah looked down, then back up. "Just make sure she hears it." Something in Charles's expression cracked, not from weakness, but from recognition. He nodded. "I will." A moment passed before Charles glanced toward the ambulance. "Come with us," he said unexpectedly. "To the hospital. You should be there. They may need to know what you did." Noah hesitated. My shift." Maya stepped forward. "He's coming. I'll handle the paperwork. He saved a passenger. That outweighs every rule we have." A black SUV pulled around to take them to the hospital. Noah climbed into the back seat, unsure where to place his hands or eyes. Charles sat across from him, elbows on his knees, staring out the window. For once, silence didn't feel like tension. It felt like healing. At the hospital, Eleanor was admitted to the cardiac critical care unit. Her vitals slowly stabilized under the machines, her heartbeat stronger now that she was under close observation. The doctors explained that she had suffered a serious arrhythmic episode, likely tied to an undiagnosed heart condition. Had CPR been delayed by even a minute more, the outcome would have been irreversible. Charles stood at her bedside long after the medical team finished. He took her hand gently. "I'm here, Ellie," he whispered, "and I won't stop paying attention this time." Behind him, Noah stood in the quiet corner of the room, unsure if he should stay longer. When he finally turned to leave, Charles caught his arm, not forcefully, but with gratitude. "You're not going back to the airport tonight," he said. "My driver will make sure you get home, and tomorrow, we'll talk. I'll make sure your life changes because of what you did." Noah opened his mouth to protest, but Charles stopped him with a look that carried no arrogance, only sincerity. "You didn't save her for a reward, I know that. But I can't let someone like you disappear back into the shadows." Later that night, Noah sat in the SUV again. This time alone in the back seat. The city lights flickered past the window as he thought of his mother and Mariella at home. They had no idea where he was. They didn't know he had just changed the course of strangers' lives, and perhaps his own. Inside the hospital, Eleanor stirred for the first time since the collapse. Her eyelids fluttered and her fingers moved weakly. Charles leaned close as her lips parted ever so slightly. "You're here," she breathed, voice paper thin. "I'm here," he said, "and I'm not going anywhere." She managed a faint smile before sleep reclaimed her. Outside, in a car headed toward a small apartment miles away from first-class cabins and billionaire lives, Noah Alvarez closed his eyes for the first time since the sky tried to steal someone's future. He didn't feel heroic. He didn't feel extraordinary. He only felt grateful that, for once in his life, being unseen had given him the chance to be exactly where he was needed, and somewhere between that plane and that hospital bed, the world quietly shifted, because a teenage janitor did the unthinkable when no one else knew how.